You're listening to the Departure Lounge podcast with your host, Tom Whittle. Your ticket to the home of aviation podcasts.
It's Sunday night, and you know what that means. A very good evening, everyone, to episode 19 of the Departure Lounge podcast here on the Departure Lounge YouTube channel. And of course, if you're listening on Spotify, hello to you as well. My name is Tom Whittle, and joining me, not as a co-host, but over in comment corner, as I like to call it now, is Ian Hartley. Ian, welcome to episode 19. Are you well?
Good evening. I'm very well, Tom. Are you? Good evening to you and everybody listening.
Too bad. Yeah, not too bad myself. Yeah, not doing too bad. Just bear with me 2 seconds. I've just had something go off. Let's. What have I done there? Oh no, we're good. We're all good. It's all right. Not to worry. Yeah, not too bad. It's been an interesting week. Very busy. Changing jobs and stuff. So yeah, it's been pretty good. So yeah, busy week of obviously podcasts as well. So as you know, of course.
Yeah, fantastic show Wednesday, brilliant.
Very, very good. And tonight should be no different. But yeah, let's get into this evening's show, and sort of kick things off before we do any housekeeping with a sort of a brief statement in terms of everything that's been happening over the last week. So, like I said, we'll keep it brief. There is an official statement going out tomorrow. As you know, Joe Dooley hasn't sort of been on the show for the last sort of 3 shows, and basically, that, like I said, the statement will go out. We have made a decision to remove Joe Dooley as co-host from the show. Full statement, like I said, will go up tomorrow on Twitter for those sort of wanting to read that. But as of sort of right now, Joe Dooley is no longer part of the Departure Lounge podcast. So yes. So with that said, let's get into the housekeeping side of things. You can follow us on Twitter, like I said, and Instagram with just links in the description below. You can follow us on Instagram at the Departure Lounge YT or on Twitter at the Dep Lounge YT. A nod in the direction of the podcasts and the channel sponsor, airspots.com, who continue to do fantastic work delivering models and everything to everybody. And of course, lastly, or not lastly, but I'll get to the last bit in a second. If you want to be a guest on the podcast, give us a message on any of the social medias that we have just mentioned. We will get you on sort of as soon as we can. And then lastly, like I said, we are on Spotify as well, when there's a link to the podcast in the description below if you fancy taking us anywhere you go. Right, so let's do this. So because of the little statement I've announced, we are doing a little sort of, I don't know, let's call it a section really, of sort of a guest host until we sort of know what we're doing. And tonight we are joined by our guest on what was episode 16, and a very warm welcome to Steve Aldridge. Steve, good evening, and welcome to the podcast again.
Yeah, well, evening to you both. Thanks for having me on, and I'm really looking forward to this tonight. So yeah,
Excellent
thank you again
stuff.
for inviting me on again.
Excellent stuff. It's good to have you back in a sort of a guest host sort of role. It should be very, very good this evening. But yeah, so if we're ready, should we get on with the podcast and bring on our guest?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let's go for it.
Fantastic. So our guest for this evening flies the A340-600 out of Bournemouth, and he's here to talk all about that and his background in aviation and pretty much his entire career. So welcome to the podcast, Jonny Smith. Jonny, very good evening and welcome.
Good evening, gents. Pleasure to be here, and I'll hopefully not bore you too much as the evening goes on.
I doubt that very much. You won't bore us at all, absolutely not. But,
I'll try my best not to.
But no. So if anybody's got any questions for Jonny this evening, and pretty much to do with anything aviation related, do put them into the chat, and we'll get Ian to read them out throughout the evening. But Jonny, tell us a little bit sort of about the background, really, as to how you sort of got into sort of the aviation side of things.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I was a very young child, I wanted to be a policeman, and then I went on holiday for the very first time, which was around about the age of 9, back in the sort of early 90s, and that was my first exposure to an airport, to aeroplanes. And I remember as a 9-year-old kid getting to Manchester Airport and being absolutely petrified at the whole thought of getting on an aeroplane. It was the middle of the night. And my little brain couldn't really compute or comprehend how an aeroplane would launch off the ground and find its way to Spain in the dark and do that successfully at 600 miles an hour at 7 miles above the Earth's surface. So I was pretty scared. And I remember looking out over the apron area at Manchester Airport, thinking this is horrendous, and I'm not up for this at all. And then it was very strange that as soon as I walked on the aeroplane, I'll remember the feeling for the rest of my life. It was a very, very strange feeling. As soon as I walked through the door off the air bridge, I thought this is incredible, and it was literally as stark a change as that, instantaneous. The cabin crew in their smart uniforms, the smell of the aeroplane, how organised and structured and smart and professional it was. I was instantly captivated by it, and that just never went away. And sort of as a young kid, sort of going on holidays from there on in, I just became more and more about the flying experience to and from than the holiday itself. And so, yeah, from the age of 9, I thought I've got to work in aviation. The stereotypical sort of ambition of a 9 or 10-year-old kid is to be a pilot. So I thought, that's it. I've got to do it. And I wasn't particularly academic, but I was pretty focused because I had that dream. So I was pretty lucky to know what I wanted to do and focus myself appropriately. But I had countless people, teachers, probably leading the pack of people who said, "Oh, look, everybody wants to be a pilot. What makes you think that you're going to be able to do it?" To people who said, "You will not be able to do it. There's no way you're going to be able to be a pilot. That's for the top, 1% of society. This is for grammar school kids. This is for the elite." So I was sort of constantly battling against a system where people didn't really understand what it was all about, and almost compared it to becoming an astronaut. So you would be put off the idea. The careers officer at school said, "Look, I'll give you some information on it, but I don't think it's a sensible thing to aspire to, because you're just going to set yourself up for a letdown." So that probably made me even more determined to do it, to be honest. I had a very, very supportive family, and still do. So that was incredible. And despite that, my parents were still very keen to sort of encourage me into backup careers and all the rest of it, because the competition was huge. And as I say, I was focused, but I had to work quite hard at school to get decent grades. But I was very determined, and everything that I did from that very first time I went on holiday was just focused on aviation. I was encouraged by, obviously back then you could do jump seat rides, so every time I did go on holiday I asked if it would be okay to go to the flight deck, and more often than not they said yes, and more often than not they said you could sit in for landings and takeoffs and all the rest of it. So that just fueled my passion for it. And just over the course of time, which is what I would say to anybody now, it's a case of networking. So I was very lucky to meet pilots on those flights, chat with them. Lots of them kept in touch, and some of them are in touch to this day. And they'd encourage me to go and contact airlines for work experience, to go and wash aeroplanes for free on a weekend at flying schools, and all those things, and just basically sort of saturate myself in aviation. And the more I did that, the more I just knew that I wanted to be a pilot for a living.
Yeah, so that sounds like quite a sort of a really good sort of background into how you kind of got into it, because I know a lot of people sort of, I suppose even nowadays, that want to be able to sort of become a pilot, sort of don't really have an idea as to how to sort of maybe get into that sort of side of things.
For sure, that's it. I don't think the guidance out there is particularly good. Still, I don't think there's particularly sort of accessible information. I mean, you can contact you can go onto the internet and speak to big training organisations like L3 and Oxford and all the rest of it. But as far as school kids or school age people are concerned, if you go into a careers office now, there's probably the same guidance on becoming a pilot as there was back in the 80s. And it's still largely to the majority of the general public, schools and colleges and universities included, a bit of probably a bit elitist and a little bit inaccessible to the majority of people. And that's how they treat it. That's how they've always treated it, and that's how they continue to treat it. And that's just not the case. So really, yeah, there's an awful lot of sort of black hole syndrome about it. You want to be a pilot, but you just literally do not know where to go. So, if there's one thing that I could say to anybody listening who wants to get into aviation and just doesn't know how, it's that unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, you've got to be proactive. You've got to go and say, right, what have I got to do now to find out more? You can write to airlines, you can email airlines, you can go down to your local airport, and at pretty much every airfield around the UK, there's going to be some sort of flying club. Go in and have a chat. I was encouraged to do that by one of the captains on a Britannia flight when I was sort of 14 years old. Go to a flying club. They're not inaccessible places for elitist rich men who fly airplanes for fun. You can go down to I went down to Blackpool Airport, which is local to me, and just went round all 4 or 5 flying clubs that were on the airport at the time, and said, look, I want to be a pilot. What's the deal? How much is it going to cost? What do I have to do? What are all the exams about? Blah blah blah. And the ones that to be honest, the majority of the places I went into as a 14-year-old kid with my dad took me very seriously. There was only one that didn't, and I walked out and we never went back. But the ones that did were very forthcoming with information, very supportive, and really kick-started me off in the right direction. But you do have to sort of go and take that leap yourself and be quite proactive.
Yeah, so I think that's excuse me. I think that's pretty good advice, really, to anyone looking into it. I mean, I did the same thing, and down sort of my way. I went up to Dunk as well, and sort of asked them about how to do things. Took a few lessons and haven't really followed it up since. And I think now, especially for me, I would kind of go down the route of just doing it for like a bit of fun, as opposed to maybe like pursuing it as a career sort of thing. But it's a good way to kind of get into that sort of thing when you're sort of starting out young. Is to, like you say, have a chat with them, see what the best route is to get into it, and then sort of the rest is all sort of down to hard work and that.
Absolutely, and don't be daunted by flying clubs and flying schools, and when you're aspiring to become a pilot, and you may have a misconception, and that may have been sort of fueled by your teachers or by your family who don't know anything about it. It can be quite intimidating. I remember going into the first couple of flying schools at Blackpool Airport, being quite intimidated because it was all middle-aged men with white shirts on and ties, and obviously had a load of flying experience. And I was there as a 14-year-old kid, thinking I'm just not going to be taken seriously. But you've just got to take that leap of faith and just go and pursue it, because nobody's going to give you anything on a plate. And there still is an awful lot of competition to become a pilot, even though the scene and how you get into it has changed quite considerably over the last 10, 15, 20 years. There's still a lot of competition, and you're still going to have to prove in an interview. Well, look, anybody can say they want to be a pilot, but what have you done personally to prove it?
That's right.
And that's the difference. And if anybody, before I was made redundant from Virgin Atlantic, I started doing the pilot interviews for new joiner pilots. And the one thing that I'd say that spoke volumes was if somebody came in passionate and energetic and full of examples of what they've done to prove that they want to be a pilot for Virgin. Anybody can say they want to be a pilot, but so well, what have you done? And for a cadet entry scheme where obviously you've got no experience behind you, anybody can say, I fancy being a pilot. Right, okay, well, have you flown a light aircraft? Oh, no. Well, I'm sorry, that's accessible to anybody. You can go and spend £80, £60 on a 20-minute, 25-minute trial lesson at your local airfield and just see if you even like being in an aeroplane. And you would be amazed at how many people come to an interview for a cadet scheme who haven't even done that. And you think, well, where's the proof? Where's the evidence of your motivation? So if you go loaded with, well, I've done a couple of lessons. I've washed aeroplanes for free on a Sunday morning. I've written to airlines for information. I've paid for a simulator experience and whatever. All this stuff is accessible to people and you don't have to have a healthy bank account to do these things. It's just about going out there and proving that you actually care enough to take your own initiative to find out what it's all about.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how long from sort of your training was it until you were sort of sitting at the front of a passenger airplane, as it were?
Well, the cadets, I was, so when I was 14, I ended up doing my first flying lesson as a birthday present, a trial flight, and obviously was hooked as I expected to be. But my family don't come from money. There was no money thrown at me to go and pay for a private pilot's license. So I had to go and work jobs. As soon as I was 16, I got a couple of jobs working alongside school, and I was on a basic minimum wage of about £4.80 an hour or whatever it was back then. So I had to do a lot of hours to save up for a flying lesson. So I was doing one flying lesson every maybe 3 months. So it took me a long time to get a PPL. I started at 14. I got it when I was 19. So the private pilot's license side of things, you will do that according to your own financial situation and the weather and things like that. But people, if you've got 8 or 10 grand sat in your bank account, you could do a PPL in probably 4 to 6 months if the weather plays the game. But for me as a kid, I'd get the odd flying lesson as a birthday present, but I'd have to save for it myself. But when I left university, and I'd applied actually to be an air traffic controller at NATS because all the cadet schemes had dried up because of 9/11. So there was very, very few, if any, cadet schemes knocking around at the time. I thought, well, I don't have the money to pay for a commercial pilot's license myself. I'll become an air traffic controller and maybe fly for fun along the side or see where it leads to. So as I was going through the selection for NATS, I noticed a company which is now L3 called CTC McAlpine, and they just started up. This was back in sort of 2003, 2002, and they'd started up a cadet scheme for EasyJet and for Thomas Cook. So I thought, well, obviously this is incredible, but there's going to be a load of applications. But I applied and I went through the selection and I got the job. So I started out in New Zealand on their cadet scheme, which effectively, although I had a PPL, it takes you from zero experience to first officer in about 2 years. So I started out there in December 2003 in New Zealand, did a year in New Zealand, came back to the UK, went to Bournemouth and Southampton. So from starting the cadet scheme on an intensive full-time course, from zero to frozen ATPL in the right-hand seat of a 737 at the time with EasyJet, having been signed off on a line check, was about 2 years.
It's certainly an intense period of training and what have you.
Yeah, it's intense, and there's a lot to cram in. The learning curve is steep. You do your basic training on a single engine aircraft, and to be honest, if you've done very little or if anything in a light aircraft, your first 10 or 15 hours is a real learning curve. But all I could compare that to really is when you first start learning to drive. The first time you jump in a car, it's you haven't got enough hands and legs and eyes and ears to do everything you need to do. But within 10 hours, you're pretty comfortable with that. But as soon as you start to get comfortable, you then progress on to twins, which is a step up beyond belief again because of the extra speed and the extra systems and the things you got to do. And you're constantly being checked and assessed and tested, and there's 14 ATPL exams to study for and to pass, multiple progress tests with the flying, and then you've got your commercial pilot's license, your instrument rating. So it never ends. And even at the point where you are holding a frozen ATPL in your hand, you still haven't. You've not made it. You're nowhere near, because you've then got to do a type rating, and you've got to learn a commercial jet, which is so much more complex than the light twin, which was the last thing you flew. So yeah, the learning curve is steep, but again, I'd just go back to what I said about motivation and passion. If you've got the motivation to do it, I'm not a particularly intelligent bloke. I'm pretty run-of-the-mill as a human being, but because I had the passion, the focus, and the drive to do it, you just apply yourself and you get it done, and you know what you've got to do to achieve that, that final goal. So yeah, it's an intensive 2 years. The learning curve is massive, but it's worth every second.
Yeah, just following up on the training quickly. What was like the first time you do the G training and go inverted? What was the sensation like for doing that?
It's funny with G, and I mean, when I did my training, there wasn't anything sort of along the lines of upset recovery. That all seemed to come from a couple of fairly recent accidents, like the Air France 447 over the Atlantic, and various other accidents that had happened because of loss of control, basically. So upset recovery training wasn't really a part of the syllabus when I did it, but I did aerobatics just alongside that, just for fun, really. And learning aerobatics does make you a better pilot. In general, sort of your manual handling. But with G-force, it's funny. You can either cope with it or you can't. You can build your tolerance to it. But aerobatics and G-force is either for you or it's not for you, and you only know that when you're doing it. And so that very first lesson, I know instructors that teach aerobatics have said that very first exposure can be very hit and miss. And I've known a couple of instructors. I was on a university air squadron myself when I was at uni, and the instructor used to say, the first time we do this with people, it's a real gamble, because you could roll inverted, the student throws up, and the vomit lands on the canopy, and you're upside down. So you're then having to work out how to roll the aircraft back normal way up, so the vomit falls on them, not you. And there's all sorts of these stories that instructors have got it wrong and right and all the rest of it. And the advice was, if you feel sick, take your glove off and throw up in your glove. That's probably the best place to do it. And people did. And it's very 50-50. People either love it or they hate it. And for me, the first time I ever pulled a loop, I absolutely hated it. I did not enjoy it at all. And then we landed, and I was like, do you know what? That's just not for me. It's not my bag at all. So the guy said, look, stick with it. If it's something you're interested in, which it was, I'd pursued it sort of privately. Stick with it, because you can improve your tolerance. So I did stick with it, and weirdly, on the second lesson, it was almost like it didn't affect me. It was just that very first lesson I thought, this is just horrific, because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know how it'd feel. And yeah, it wasn't for me. But thereafter, I absolutely love it. It's the most fun you can have in an aeroplane. But I think certainly flying airlines for a living, which is very regimented and organised and obviously dictatorial with the rules. You've got to fly according to the rules, and there's certainly no larking about in an airliner. So to get your fill, you've got to go and take a PITS or an extra or whatever up into the air and just throw it around and have a bit of fun. So I really enjoy it now. But yeah, certainly that first experience could be a little bit hit and miss. Yeah,
no, I'm absolutely sure it would be. Yeah, of course.
Fantastic.
I'll take you up, Steve. One day when you fancy it, mate, we'll go for it. We'll have it.
Oh, mate, I get dizzy going up the stairs. I don't think I'd cope with it, to be honest.
Well, that's given me even more incentive to do it, because that'll be quite funny.
I'll cover you. Don't you worry about that.
You want to get rid of those spiral staircases, I think, if you're getting dizzy.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But no, we'll pause slightly, and we'll go over to Ian for a couple of comments.
We've just got Jeremy Carlisle's listening. He said good evening to everybody.
Good evening.
As does Plane Spotter 555. Now, there is a couple of questions. One of them's from Plane Spotter 555, but I'll start with my own question for you, Jonny. And when you were going back to when you were washing airplanes at Blackpool Airport, this, that, and the other, like when you were leaving school, did you ever consider joining RAF as sort of an easy option to get into flying?
Yeah, I did. I mean, at the time, I'd written to pretty much every airline in the UK. This was back in the sort of the mid to late 90s. I'd written to every airline I'd ever heard of for information. And back then, the advice was really, as an ab initio guy, to seriously consider the Air Force. The two most common routes into an airline were ex-Air Force or self-improver. And the self-improver route was pretty long and drawn out. You had to go and build your ratings off your own back, and then hopefully getting a job as an instructor, and then become a multi-engine instructor, and then maybe join a commuter airline, and basically, you're talking a few years before you'd ever get a sniff at a jet job. And cadet schemes were absolutely few and far between. I mean, BAs was probably the biggest at the time, and they took a very modest number of people every year. Britannia used to do one, but they took maybe 6 guys a year. Air 2000, 4 or 5 guys. Yeah. So you were very, very lucky to get onto a cadet scheme. So for me, it was either knuckle down and maybe do a different job to go self-improver, or to apply to the Air Force. So I thought, well, I always knew weirdly that I just did not want to be a fast jet pilot, and that seems to a lot of kids would go, that's crazy. Why would you not want to fly a Tornado? It just never interested me at all. So the Air Force wasn't a sort of natural, I've got to be in the Air Force. But as a means to an end, I thought, yeah, absolutely. So I looked into it. And then, as I say, when I was at university, I was quite lucky to get onto a university air squadron where the Air Force gave you 90 hours of flying for free while you did your degree. With obviously the ultimate aim of then getting you into the Air Force, getting you on a bursary and getting you into officer training and becoming an Air Force pilot. But as I went through the UAS stuff, I just knew that the Air Force life wasn't for me. And it either is or it isn't. You're either a military-minded person or you're not. And I didn't like the concept of doing 10, 12, 15 years in the military, being dictated to where I had to go, where I had to live, where being away for months at a time, and effectively being shot at. I fancied sitting there having a cup of tea on the way to Alicante. I didn't fancy being shot at by whoever. So I knew I'd be wasting the Air Force's time by applying. So back then, I was really hanging my hat on either a cadet scheme or as I say, going to NATS, being an air traffic controller, and maybe flying and building my time and experience alongside that over a few years before then sidestepping maybe into a commuter airline, a turboprop operator, and then working up. But the Air Force certainly at the time was something to consider. But you've got to be quite careful that you're not just joining purely to use them to get flying experience to become an airline pilot, because the lifestyle just won't suit you. You've got to take the whole package into account. And for me, the military life just wouldn't have suited me for the length of time that I would have had to have been in.
Yeah, that's right. It's a different kind of discipline altogether, isn't it?
Entirely. And I have every bit of respect for anybody who goes in the military. It's fantastic. But you've got to be that way inclined.
Absolutely.
It's an entirely different life. And even, I said, look, I'll apply for a bursary, but I only really want to take it, and I only really would take it if you could offer me transport. If if I can fly a TriStar or a C-17, then I'd do it. And they just laughed at me as I knew they would, because they want everybody to be stream fast jet. They want everybody to aspire to be fast jet, and then they pick people off down the line. So I just knew that life wasn't really what I wanted.
No, well, that's it. I think even if you had gone down that route, I don't think you would have stuck it out either, would you? Because I just don't, like you say, you're not that way inclined, are
you? That's it. And it's no good to anybody. If you're not going to be in an environment that you can give your all and give it everything you've got and be happy there, it's not going to work for you. Likewise, on the flip side, I know plenty of military pilots who would be absolutely bored rigid in an airline, and airline flying just wouldn't be for them. So you've got to pick the environment that's right for you. And as I say, I just knew from the age of 9 that I wanted to be an airline pilot. I've never been interested in helicopters. I've never been interested in really in the military. I've just wanted to be an airline pilot. And that's just personal preference, but yeah, you've got to take the whole package into account when you're sort of making your decision about which path you're going to go down.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to your airline pilot flying, your normal flying, what you do now. Plane Spotter 555 is asking, when's your next flight? And where?
My next flight is on Tuesday next week, so in a couple of days' time. And I am doing the Fuzhou flight, the China trip, out of Bournemouth, and I think it's about 7 p.m. the check-in, so it'll be an 8 p.m. departure. Off to Fuzhou, and then I'll land back about 3 p.m. on Thursday.
You get there, you have a couple of nights stopover or something, and then back
it's
again.
just a night. That trip's just a night. So we launch off on Tuesday. It's about a 12-hour flight out there. When we get there, we go to the hotel and rest away from the aircraft, and then a period of time later, we go back and we operate it back to Bournemouth. So yeah, it is what it is. People, and including myself, obviously, when you think about being a pilot, you think, beaches, Caribbean, and all the rest of it. Now, that still does exist, albeit probably after COVID, those trips with those airlines will be hacked away at and reduced in length quite considerably. But an awful lot of airline flying, cargo flying now is fly somewhere, have minimum rest down route because that's the most cost effective, and then you operate back, and that's you. I'm
going to ask you about the glamour side of it. So you'll get to China, you'll have yourself, I don't know what do they eat out there, a couple of, I don't know, Alsatian kebabs or something, and have a quick kip and back here.
That's pretty much it. We'll go from the aircraft to the hotel. The hotel's decent. You go there, and the rooms are very good, and it is there for rest purposes. Obviously with COVID as well at the minute, there's restrictions on leaving the hotel and all the rest of it. In better times, you can obviously leave the hotel and go and look at the area a little bit more. But trips, when I worked for various different airlines, trips would vary from one night on the east coast of the States, because it's only a sort of 7-hour flight out there anyway, or you could get a week down route somewhere depending on where you were going. So at BA we used to do a Santiago trip into Chile that you got 6 nights, and that was incredible. We did a 6-night Muscat. So some of the trips were absolutely incredible, but that would be more based on scheduling requirements as opposed to the company being nice to you saying, go on, have a holiday for a week. It would be based purely on the schedule, so you were either lucky or unlucky with the length of time you got down route. Some of the trips at Virgin, we got 6 nights in St. Lucia, 4 nights in Barbados and Antigua. So some of them were absolutely incredible. But obviously airlines, and when you talk about glamour, airlines nowadays are hugely focused on cost, because they have to be. So if they can get away without you staying for 4 nights, and they could have you staying for 1 or 2, guess what? That's what they're going to do, because as long as it's legal with the flight time limitations, which are very, very good at sort of protecting you against fatigue and things like that. As long as it's legal, they'll bring you back on the minimum length of time that they can legally give you down route. These sort of 10-day trips that used to exist quite commonly in the 70s, 80s, 90s. They just don't exist anymore, because it's not commercially viable to have that length of time down route unless the schedule dictates it. So if an airline flies to a destination once a week, well, you're got to have a week there. If it flies there daily, you're probably not going to get more than a day or 2 at a push. Glamour wise, there is an element of glamour to it. Virgin Atlantic, going off to the Caribbean for a 6-night trip, it was fantastic. There is nobody who can deny that it was fantastic. But jet lag, commuting, I commute from up north. I know that's my choice. That's not the airline's choice. That's my choice. But it's tiring work. And yeah, as I say, certainly after COVID, things are going to take probably a little bit of a turn in respect of these airlines have lost millions and millions and millions of pounds. They've got to claw it back somehow. So they will address their scheduling and their rostering, and they won't have us in nice hotels down route for longer than we have to be there. So pros and cons.
These,
Yeah. Sorry, Steve.
These like trips to China, and even when you were at Virgin on the longer trips, what would you take? Sort of three pilots or four?
Yeah, you take three. So yeah, on a China return, you'd take three guys. So you're talking 12-hour flight out, maybe sort of closer to 13 back. So you'd have your two operating guys, and then you'd have a relief pilot as well, who'd be in the jump seat for the takeoff and the landing. But you'd split the flight up into three. So every crew member, every flight crew member will get sort of between 3 and 4 hours off. At which point that crew member will go into the cabin on, obviously, a lot of our aircraft are, in fact, all of them are either ex-Virgin or ex-Etihad aircraft. So we've still got crew rest areas. The Etihad aircraft have still got the first class suites on the aeroplane, so you can go and get completely away from the flight deck and rest, and that makes the world of difference. Just to get out of the flight deck for a period of time. So you're talking, on a 12-hour flight, you're talking probably 8 hours in the flight deck yourself, with 3 to 4 hours off during a period of that period of time. So when you compare that to my sister's an A&E nurse, and she'll do a 14-hour shift straight with probably a 20-minute break here and there. We don't have it too badly, but you've obviously got the jet lag side of things to contend with as well. But on a 3-man trip, it's not too bad, because you do get a decent length of time away from the flight deck.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess on the jet lag, sort of China for a night, New York for a night, you wouldn't even change your watch, would you? Stay on English time?
No, yeah, you do. I mean, people have their own sort of ways of doing things. And when I first started long haul with BA, guys would say, you must do it like this, or you must do it like that. And one of the trainers I flew with, he said, look, you'll do it the way that you want to do it and the way that works for you. And I certainly find that trips of 1 or 2 nights, it's just easier to stay on UK time. So, you do end up awake in the middle of the night in Chinese time. And obviously the middle of the night, there's not an awful lot to do. When we used to do the career rotations, you'd have, all of us would be walking around at the terminal in Seoul Airport, and it'd be 4 a.m. local time, and you'd be wide awake. So you'd be off to get a coffee from Starbucks or whatever. And then when the sun came up, that'd be UK night time, so you'd go off to bed, and you'd hope the blackout blinds would do their job. So yeah, I certainly find that it's easier to stay on UK time. But if you've got, like the trips, the Santiago trip to Chile with BA was a fantastic one, because for all it was almost a 16-hour flight, you'd have 4 pilots, so you'd get half the flight off. And then when you got there, it was only a 4-hour time zone change, so you were pretty much, give or take, on UK time. So they were the easiest. But if you've got anything sort of more than 2 or 3 nights, it probably is better to try and adjust to local time, just so you've got eating options and shopping and entertainment. Because if you're asleep through their daytime, you're not going to have an awful lot to do at night.
Well, no, of course not. Yeah, of course.
But it is a balancing act, and it is tiring. And mates who have done long haul for a lot longer than I have said you never get used to the jet lag. You just get used to feeling like death, and I think that's probably a pretty accurate reflection. You never get fully used to time zone changes of that extent in a short space of time. It is pretty grueling on the body.
Wonderful.
It's not natural, is it, for the human body? I mean, I did nights in the job what I do for a few years, and that was bad enough. So
yeah.
If you're working nights and you're throwing in different time zones and stuff like that, it's just going to play hell with you, isn't it?
It is, and your body and your brain are very, very sensitive and very finely tuned. And as soon as you start throwing that into chaos with eating and with sleeping and all the rest of it, it does have a detrimental effect on your body and your health. It is not good for you at all. Your body is used to sleeping when it's dark and being awake when it's light. And if that opportunity isn't available to you because you work shifts, it's really, really hard to adjust to it. And you've got to find coping mechanisms, and a lot of it is discipline. You've got to be pretty disciplined with what you eat and exercise and things like that. And it's very, very tempting. Certainly, being a pilot is a very unhealthy life anyway, because of time zone changes, because of the food you generally eat on the aeroplanes. It's unless you take your own, they're not the healthiest of meals on an aeroplane. Plus, then you get down route, and a lot of the time you're either too tired to go and do a bit of exercise, or the temptation is to go to the bar as opposed to go and doing a bit of exercise. So you've got to be quite disciplined with the balance, because before you know it, the lifestyle can catch up with you quite quickly.
I can imagine it would do.
Yeah. It's something you've got to be quite aware of.
Keep getting your
You there, Tom?
yeah,
Sorry.
keep getting your questions in the comments and stuff. We'll get them read out while we're here for the next sort of 45 minutes or so. But let's go from the beginning up until sort of obviously now flying for European cargo. Tell us about the journey as to how you got to there. So who was like the first airline you went to, and then sort of what led to sort of this sort of moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's I was very, very lucky when I was leaving university to get through the selection process for CTC at the time. And so as a cadet pilot out in New Zealand, we were already earmarked for EasyJet. So assuming we passed everything as we had to, we would then go on to EasyJet at the end of that process. So I did that. I joined EasyJet in 2005 on the 737 based at Liverpool. So we were flying the 300 and the 700, flew that for about 18 months, and then they got rid of all their 737s and went over to 319s and 320s, so we converted onto the Airbus. So I think after about 6 years in EasyJet, I got command. So I had a command on the A320 for about, the remaining 7 years of my time at EasyJet. And EasyJet was a brilliant company. They treat us very well. They paid well. Say promotion was on the cards relatively early in your career, assuming you met all the standards. And it was honest about what it did. You rocked up on day one and you flew the flights that they told you to fly, and then on day 5 you went home and you had your days off. And lots of people loved it because they got to stay at home in their own beds every night, and you weren't jet lagged. You were tired because you were doing 4 sectors maybe a day. You could do 20 flights a week, and that's tiring. That's a different sort of style of tiredness. But to lots of people, the short haul European life is the most compatible with the life that they want, because they get the time at home and they get to sleep in their own beds. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a brilliant company. Sat in command was great, but I'd always had the niggle in the back of my brain to go long haul. The kid in my brain was not for going home at the end of every day. I wanted to get off the aeroplane somewhere far away from my house and experience a little bit of that, round the world lifestyle. So I knew I had to go long haul at some point. And in total, I did 13 years at EasyJet, which was a long time. People generally, if they're going to leave, they leave quite early on. They'll do a couple of years, get some hours, and then leave. But I did 13 years there very happily. And at the time, BA were advertising for direct entry long haul, which was quite rare. They didn't often do that. BA traditionally take onto the A320, and then you do your time on that, and then you move up into, you can put in a fleet bid transfer request to go onto something bigger or long haul or whatever. Yeah. But at the time, this was back in 2014, 15. BA were recruiting for direct entry long haul, so I thought I'll go for their assessment. I mean, BA's selection process is pretty notorious for for being quite intense, quite in depth, and quite sort of stringent. I thought there's no way a pleb like me is going to pass their selection, and I did. So, well, here we go. I've got a big decision to make here, because I've got now a potentially a long haul job offer where I'm going to have to demote back into the right hand seat. I'm going to have to take quite a big pay cut, and it's a complete change of life. And it's funny how much I thought about long haul for years, but then when the opportunity's on the table, you've got to make that decision. It was quite a big shout. So anyway, I ended up saying yes to BA. But at the time, the jobs were fairly dry, so they put us in a hold pool for a period of time. In that period of time, about 18 months, Virgin Atlantic started recruiting. So I thought, fantastic. I've always wanted to work for Virgin Atlantic since I was a kid. It was where I wanted to be pretty much all my life. So I applied to Virgin. Got offered an interview, but then Monarch went bust. So Virgin, quite rightly and very admirably, said they were going to interview redundant Monarch pilots first. So my interview got kiboshed. BA ended up then saying, right, we've got an offer for you now for the 787. It's like, fantastic, I'll come and join you on the 787. So I joined BA in 2016, 2018, and started on the 787. And then within a couple of months of starting at BA, Virgin phoned and said, right, do you want an interview now? So I've just been at BA for literally 2 months. So I did my interview with Virgin and passed. And it's all very personal where you go, why you choose to go to particular airlines. I thought, right, if I stay at BA, I'm obviously in a mega mammoth airline with probably as close to absolute job security as I'm going to get. But I'm going to be commuting to Heathrow for the rest of my life. At the time, it was 20 to 22 years for long-haul command. Whereas Virgin Atlantic was saying, look, you join us now. Command could be on the table within 7 years. We're getting the A350, so there's an opportunity. There's a Manchester base, which for me up in the northwest is absolutely perfect.
Of course.
So I ended up saying yes to Virgin. So I did about 9 or 10 months at BA on the 787, which was fantastic. And then joined Virgin on the A330 back in 2019. And that, for me, at the time, was my career airline. I was then going to be set for life, 25 years to go to retirement. I am happy as Larry in Virgin. And it was incredible. It was absolutely fantastic. I was doing sort of 3 to 4 trips a month, long Caribbean trips out of Gatwick and the odd East Coast out of Heathrow. And it was an incredible lifestyle with great people. And then COVID happened. So I was actually earmarked for an A350 conversion at the end of March 2020. And I ended up operating my last A330 flight back from St. Lucia on the 24th of March. So I was literally a week away from my A350 conversion when COVID all kicked off. And the irony is, if I'd have done 1 day of my A350 conversion course, I'd have kept my job. But because I hadn't done the 350 conversion, I was then in the running for redundancy from Virgin because of COVID. So they went then through a process with the union and whatever, and in the end they made about 400 guys redundant, most of whom were on the 747 and the A330. So they kept the 350 and the 787 flying during COVID, but pretty much everybody off the 330 and the jumbo got made redundant. So I was then redundant, and that was utterly terrifying and very upsetting, because I'd finally got to the airline I wanted to be in. Past all the training, was very much enjoying life on the line with all these prospects, and COVID just absolutely annihilated the industry, as we all know. So I was then redundant, and the biggest sort of concern I had was, what transferable skills do I have? Absolutely none. For pilots, generally speaking, there are some very clever guys out and girls out there who can do other things, but the majority of us have absolutely nothing else going for us other than the ability to fly an aeroplane. So all of a sudden I'm thinking, well, what do I do? There's only so long savings are going to last, and I've got a mortgage to pay. So I've got to really get off my backside here and get proactive. And so I ended up getting a couple of jobs one with the NHS, one working in a pub. And again, without going into too much detail about it, I was blessed by some very good people throwing me good opportunities at the time. Again, I think if you network and you generally are nice to people, they'll be nice back to you. And I certainly found that if you're down to earth and humble and motivated and and keen to do the right thing, people will help you out. And I was thrown opportunities doing jobs I never thought I'd do, which tied me over. But obviously, you've always got this this utter despair in the back of your head that you're no longer flying for a living, and there's no end in sight with COVID and with the industry. And this is the thing that we always knew this, but you don't really appreciate it until you're in the situation yourself. This industry is so volatile and so changeable and so susceptible to external influences, terrorism, global pandemics, banking crisis, financial crashes, volcano eruptions. All these things can literally stop aviation overnight. So to anybody who's embarking on a 30 or 40 year career in aviation, the advice I'd now give them is be aware of that, save some of the money that you earn, and potentially go and look at doing other things along the side, because you might need them one day. So I was very lucky that an opportunity came up with European Cargo. So for there to be a wide body, Airbus rated, UK based flying job during a pandemic is better than a lottery win. And for European to be recruiting at the time was incredible. But of course, every man and his dog from Virgin and from various other airlines, made guys redundant, were all applying. And there was a very small number of job opportunities. But again, because I'd flown with a guy at Virgin who I got on with very well, he'd left and joined European months before I did. He put in a good word and I got an interview. So here I am now on the A340 that, again, I never expected to fly a 4-engine jet in my career. And now here we are flying that. So, yeah, the cargo world is something that never really figured in my long-term plan, but here I am with this incredible opportunity to stay current on an Airbus and to fly for a living again.
With
go on.
Sorry, I was going to say, with the exception, obviously, of 2 extra engines, is there much difference between the 330 and the 340 layout within the cockpit?
Very little. You wouldn't really notice much, aside from the fact that there's obviously 2 more thrust levers and a couple more switches on the overhead panel. But this is the beauty of what Airbus does. Airbus does it very well. The commonality between the fleets. So really, there's no reason why anybody with a bit of A320 time couldn't get into the flight deck of an A340 and find their way around perfectly happily. The difference really is just in the handling, because obviously the 600 is a huge aeroplane, and so ground handling is very different. The momentum of the aeroplane, you're talking 360 tons with a bit of cargo down the back, and the 319 was sort of 60 tons all up weight. So you're talking 6 A320s make up the weight of one A340-600. So the differences are in the handling. But if you went and sat in the flight deck of a 340 as a 320 operator, you wouldn't notice much difference at all.
Ian, I'll pass it back over to you. There's a couple more comments in the in the chat that we'll get through before we move on.
Yeah, we've got Plane Spotter 555 again. He says, I'll be there. I think he was referring back to your next flight on Tuesday. I think he's going to be
nice one. Very good.
Taking pictures of filming it. And I think, what about you, Steve? Might you be there?
I might have wander up. I had a bit of a bad record with John. It took me forever to get my first ever photo of him, so I've got some making up to do, to be honest.
Yeah, I thought I'd offended you, mate. Every time I said I was down there, you're like, yeah, no, I'm not available. Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah, it wasn't personal. I do apologise.
That's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, and Leo911, he's asking if you've ever been in bad turbulence.
I have, and yeah, Turbulence is one of those things that, again, it's uncomfortable, and to anybody down the back, it's not a pleasant experience sitting in Turbulence, but Turbulence will never cause an aeroplane any major dramas. It's just uncomfortable. But yeah, I'd probably say, maybe 3 times in my entire career of flying commercially, I've been in Turbulence that you go, right, I've had enough of this now. One was over the middle of the Atlantic with Virgin, actually, and it was severe turbulence for about 45 minutes. So for 1 minute you go, well, this is a bit of a giggle. For 45, it's not a giggle at all anymore. And it was severe enough to sort of be pulling you out of your seat into your straps, so you're fully out of your seat. It was really uncomfortable. But as I say, it's just inconvenient more than anything else. I've been in what they call wake turbulence before, flying into Paris Charles de Gaulle. I remember flying in behind an Air France A380 in the EasyJet 320, and we were turning onto the ILS and caught, obviously, the wingtip vortices of this 380, and it was enough. We were in a right-hand bank at the time, and it was enough to violently force us to the left. It tripped the autopilot out, and both me and the first officer had full right stick, and we were still rolling left. So that focused the mind a little bit. But again, after 3 seconds, you were out of the other side of it, and it wasn't an issue. And then I think the other time I'd say was when I was going into Innsbruck. We used to fly into Innsbruck with EasyJet, and that was always interesting. But if you did this particular type of approach on a particular weather day, you were almost guaranteed to have what they call the phone wind, which was up the Brenner Pass in the mountains. And if the wind was blowing up this pass into the valley, you would invariably get severe turbulence. And it'd only be for a few seconds, but it would be enough to focus the mind. But again, it's, as I say, it's never dangerous. It's just irritating more than anything else.
Have you had turbulence? Say you've been flying across to one of your long haul flights, and you're on your rest period, for instance, and you're all nicely feet up and what have you in your first class lounge in this Etihad, just like having a bit of a nod, and all of a sudden it just starts bumping around.
Yeah,
and
it's been bumping around for the whole period of your rest. Yeah, I've had exactly that. And then when you go back on duty again in the flight deck, it smooths out nicely again. You think, well, come on, I've had 3 hours break, and for the whole 3 hours you've been throwing me around. But yeah, at the end of the day, there's not a lot you can do about it. Flight planning departments always have great, weather people who'll let them know where the turbulence is and where the jet streams are and whatever. And if it's severe enough, you'll be flight planned around it. But the weather's its own beast, so it'll do what it does. And sometimes you can't forecast it. And all you can do is, we've got a procedure for flying through turbulence that we follow by setting certain power settings and speeds. And obviously you switch the seatbelt signs on and you just ride it through. And as I say, it's inconvenient as opposed to dangerous.
Yeah. What about being caught in a storm? Has that ever happened to you?
Yeah, I mean, I say that we've got great weather radar equipment on board that paints where the bad stuff is, and it's it's certainly made for idiots. The red is bad and green is good, so you don't fly towards the red. But on occasion, certainly in the Far East, when you're operating out to China and Korea and places like that, the storms out there at certain times of the year are absolutely gargantuan and insane, and they're lighting up the sky. But again, you're very rarely caught in a storm because you've got your flight planning information before you go, so you generally know where stuff's going to be. And then your weather radar to back it up. But yeah, every now and again you can sort of clip the edge of a storm. And I've been struck by lightning a couple of times. They say it never strikes twice. Well, it did with me. I've been struck twice. And again, if that was on a passenger carrying aircraft, it was with EasyJet on the 320 coming into Amsterdam, and it's more spectacular to look at than actually what it is. So the passengers in the cabin will see a bolt of light go from one end of the aeroplane to the other, and it looks pretty spectacular. But generally speaking, it doesn't cause any real trouble. So you'll land, and you have to obviously have a lightning inspection, and you can generally see the entry hole where the lightning's gone in. That'll need to be looked at, and if it's within limits, you can go, and if it's not, it needs to be repaired, and that's it. But generally speaking, it might knock a radio out for a minute or so, but it's not going to cause the aeroplane any dramas.
No, that's it. I think they've got that many redundancy features and things like that, haven't they? That things
Absolutely.
Like that don't happen, do they?
Absolutely, and obviously you got all your static wicks on the aeroplane, and it does what it does, and as I say, it very, 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 very rarely causes any trouble whatsoever. It's just a spectacular experience. When I first had it, as a relatively new joiner FO, the noise it made as the lightning bolt cracked the aeroplane was enough to make me scream like a little girl. But in reality, the effect of it was minimal. It didn't cause any trouble whatsoever.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Tom?
I'll ask this one from Plane Spotter 555. He says, do you ever get bored being towed along the taxiways at Bournemouth?
It's quite an unusual procedure, because the taxiways at Bournemouth, they haven't ever been designed for an aeroplane the size or weight of a 340. So yeah, we've got to get towed on and off the runway. Do we get bored? No, I mean it's only a few minutes worth, at the end of a flight. So it is what it is. But the issue that we've got at Bournemouth is, you could be towed up to the runway holding point, and if at the holding point there's then a wind change, or the runway gets if there's a rain shower and the runway's wet, because it's quite a short runway at Bournemouth, and the 340 is obviously a big heavy jet, you can then be limited with your takeoff performance. So you've then got to wait for the wind to change, or for the runway to dry out, and that has been known. But no, the actual procedure of being towed on and off the runway, they've got it nailed down to a T. Logistically, it works very well, and I think it causes more trouble for people who are trying to work around us as opposed to us guys ourselves. So, after a departure, the runway's got to be closed for a period of time while they do a surface inspection. So anybody, the L3 cadets who are orbiting on base waiting to land are probably going to have a 20-minute wait before they can do so. So I think our operation causes a bit more of a headache to others than it does to ourselves. But for us, they've got it absolutely down to a T logistically.
Yeah, so you also mentioned like Innsbruck and stuff. Would you say sort of the Innsbruck approach is sort of the most sort of challenging one you've had, or is there one out there that's more challenging than that?
Yeah, there was a couple. I mean, at EasyJet, they called them Cat C airports. I think that's how they called it. They labelled it. But we did Innsbruck, Gibraltar, Funchal, and generally in specific terms, you were trained to operate into those places. You weren't just one just didn't appear on your roster. You had to go and sit in a simulator and do a couple of hours of practice approaches into these places to then be signed off and competent to operate into them. So generally people would be selected for, based on their sim reports and based on their, proficiency. And then you'd be given this training, and then you'd be able to operate in. So you'd only generally be selected for one, maybe two of them. You wouldn't be operating into all the Cat C airfields. But the ones that I operated into, they have sort of different challenges that are specific to that individual place. And Innsbruck and Funchal were the two places that I did as a pilot, and both 90% of the time were an absolute joy because the weather was lovely. And if the weather's lovely, you've just got a lovely scenic, different sort of experience for that day, which is great. I mean, flying down to Funchal, I did Funchal maybe 15, 20 times, and 18 of those times it was clear blue sky, light winds. So it was an absolute pleasure to go down there and not just do a radar vectored ILS like you did everywhere else. It was a nice, sort of visual circuit, which was good fun in the 320 because you didn't do it that often. But the days that caused you trouble, which did happen, 10% of the time, yeah, you had your work cut out a little bit more. But again, then you'd have the fuel for a couple of diverts. You'd have all the bolt holes up your sleeves. You're never in a position where you had to commit to an airfield that was bad weather or whatever. But yeah, I did one particular approach into Funchal, and it was just like the YouTube videos that you see of the wing waggling around the bay and the wind shear and the go around and all that. But again, you trained for it, so as long as you're comfortable with what you're trying to achieve and what you're looking out for and the pitfalls and you're aware of it and when to call it off, it's absolutely fine. And as I say, the training that you get equips you very well for operating into those places. But Innsbruck and Funchal were equally complex and as difficult as each other, but for different reasons.
So if you had to sort of rank them as like a top three, Gibraltar, Funchal, and Innsbruck, in what order would you put them?
That's really, really difficult to answer because if you had a bad experience on a particular day at one of those airfields, you go, "Oh my God, this is the worst." But I think in order of challenge, because of the various factors that you've got to think about, I think I'd put Innsbruck at the top. So that to me was probably the most challenging because it had a lot of different, an awful lot of different things that you had to think about, and the weather was quite changeable. And then I operated into Gib as an FO maybe once, but I've heard some horrible stories of wind shear and all that. But for me personally, I'd put Innsbruck at the number one top spot, Funchal as number two, and then Gib as number three.
Interesting. Sort of half expected Funchal to be sort of the top because Funchal, you've got that sort of why I call that the Kai-Tak turn. Going into the airport there. But do
you know what? On a nice weather day, it's an absolute non-event. It's a pleasure. It's an absolute joy to fly into Funchal because the view out the window is so nice. And even on the day that the wind was horrendous and it was right bang on the limit, and we ended up going around. As long as you just stick to the procedure, it's not really a big deal. The issue at Funchal was purely the wind. There was no other major issue with Funchal. It was just the wind, and when the wind was a particular strength from a particular direction, you knew you were going to have sheery wind and turbulence. But with Innsbruck, you had obviously major terrain considerations. You had multiple different types of approach. You had different procedures to follow if you wanted to call the approach off at different stages.
Of course.
So there was a lot. I found there was a lot more to think about at Innsbruck, but there's a lot to think about at all of them. But as I say, if you've got the training behind you, and if you stick to the rules, you're never going to go too far wrong. And the beauty of EasyJet, and I'm sure it's the same from every airline nowadays, is they were very supportive of you. If you weren't comfortable and you went around and you diverted somewhere because you weren't comfortable, they were very supportive of that. They would be fine with that. Obviously, they don't want you operating to beyond your comfort zone, or obviously breaking the rules and busting limits and wind limits and whatever else. So as long as you stuck to the rules, they were fine. They were fine.
Good stuff.
Yeah, you say about tricky landings. You had a recent flight to New York and they made you approach from the south, immediate right bank and land. How was that?
That was my line check as well. So it's just absolutely typical that you've got a training captain in the jump seat watching everything you're doing. And I've probably done 30 JFKs, and I've every single time had a radar vectored ILS that at worst has been the ILS that's offset by a few degrees. But this particular day, and for no real reason that we could see, because the wind was favouring the normal ILS runway, they said, you're going to be vectored onto the Canarsie approach onto 13 left. I was like, hang on a minute. Like, A, I've not done that before. And B, this is my line check. Like, give me a break. I just need a nice, easy, simple radar vectored ILS. But do you know what? It was a pleasure because the weather was nice on the day. There's a lot of different things to think about, and it's very unusual that effectively you end up flying down towards a football stadium, and then at about 350, 400 feet, you make quite a pronounced right turn. fairly similar to Kai Tak. And then you land in it, and in a big aeroplane, it must look pretty spectacular from the ground. But again, the kit is designed to help you out an awful lot. And if you just slow it down, the biggest thing is with an airliner is to slow it down early. If you're doing something for the first time, don't conform to air traffic pressuring you to keep certain speeds to certain distances. Just slow it down, get it configured nice and slow and steady, and then you can just follow the procedure. So actually, in reality, I'd egged it up to being more than it was, and it actually ended up being a pleasure because it vectors you right towards Manhattan. So you're flying nose onto Manhattan, and on a lovely crystal clear day, which it was, the views out the window were absolutely stunning. So you could see Manhattan beautifully clearly, and then 400 feet you bank right and land. So actually, when I did it, it was a complete non-event, and again, it was nice to do something a little bit different. I just wish it hadn't have been on my line check, but it went well, so that was fine. So the trainer was happy.
Yeah, you say about would you say New York and London on clear days are the best places to land for views and what have you?
For me, 100%, yeah. And there's still plenty of places in the world that I've not flown to that I'm sure are equally as spectacular. But it's funny. Just before I was chatting to a mate who flies at BA, and he said, "Do you know what? Of all the places that we've flown to in the world, I'd still say popping out of cloud and seeing the London skyline is about as impressive as it gets. London from the air is absolutely stunning. I'd say closely followed by Manhattan, the New York skyline. When you're looking head on towards the Statue of Liberty and the World Trade Center and all that, it is phenomenal. And I think as a pilot, certainly, you've got these bucket list sort of destinations that you want to fly into and tick the box. And for me, those two were flying a heavy jet into Heathrow and flying a heavy jet into JFK. Those two experiences haven't ever failed to blow my mind. And I think no matter how many times you do it, because you're doing it in slightly different conditions each time, and there's day and night, and obviously the cities look completely different in the day and night. You can never ever fail to be blown away by looking out the window at London or at New York, and you fly with 64-year-old captains who have done it for 40 years, and they're still as captivated by the view out the window as they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's phenomenal. Yeah. We're very lucky to see a lot of the things that we see, for sure.
So you want to give Nuki a go? Nuki for me is like when you come in over like Watergate Bay. I've flown to many places. And that one for me, it was on a sort of a semi-clear day. There was a bit of cloud in the sky, but once you were under that cloud base, and you were coming in over the water, over the bay, and that, for me at the moment, until I sort of go out and fly a bit more, is probably the most amazing view that I've had for flying. So.
Nuki's beautiful. We used to fly the 320 in there with EasyJet. I remember going in a Nuki a few times, and Jersey as well. Jersey, the view out the window is absolutely beautiful on a sunny, clear blue day. But yeah, Nuki, if you come in onto the Easterly runway over the beach, it is absolutely stunning. When I came back from New York a couple of weeks ago, and the weather in the UK was glorious, and you could see, Land's End and the Nuki coastline from miles and miles away, and we were just nose to the window again. It's stunning, absolutely stunning. Yeah,
so occasionally, so where I live, occasionally, like sort of the more so the New York run, occasionally we do get sort of the 340s sort of going over the house here about 17,000 feet. So I'll have to sort of keep my eyes out on keep my eyes open rather on flight radar and stuff, and just see when the next one's coming over and see if you're on it.
Yeah, it's funny because I'd been down in Bournemouth for a couple of days off between New York trips fairly recently, and I was at a loose end, sort of having a really nice chill day in the sunshine around Bournemouth. I thought, you know what, I'm going to go to the airport and actually stand at the end of the runway and watch the 340 in from New York. And I'd never done it. I'd never been to the end of the runway before and watched it, and it's phenomenal. It's like we were saying before, aviation and aeroplanes, certainly big aeroplanes, are just captivating. To a 5-year-old or a 55-year-old, it doesn't really matter. People get sort of captivated by it, and I was, I've got sort of 11,000 hours of flying and heavies and lights and mediums and whatever else, but I was stood at the end of the runway watching that thing come in, absolutely in awe of it. It's just mind-boggling. So yeah, even I sort of still, every time I look in the air, if I see a contrail, I look on plane finder to see what it is and where it's going and all the rest of it, because we're all still kids at heart when it comes to aviation, really.
Of course, that'll never sort of. I don't think that'll ever change, really, no matter sort of how old.
No,
you get.
and do you know what? I think if it did ever change, that's when you need to question your relationship with aviation. I think you should always have that passion, and if you do, you're always gonna have an affiliation with aviation if you find that stuff interesting.
Yeah.
And I can't ever see that changing for me. I'm just as captivated and obsessed with airplanes and with flying as I was when I was 9 years old. That's never ever changed. And as I say, when I was made redundant, it was utterly terrifying, because not only financially, but because the passion, of what I absolutely love doing more than anything else, had been taken away. And I was very lucky. I've got a very good mate at Blackpool Airport who runs a flying club, and he was very understanding of how it must have felt. So he said, "Look, come down. I need this airplane flying. It needs an engine run or whatever." And I went down and did that, and just flying, just taking myself off on my own in a Cessna or a Piper or whatever for an hour, immediately reset my brain, and I landed a lot calmer, happier, more chilled than I left. So yeah, flying has a massive effect on me, and I think to most people who are into aviation, they've got this weird sort of, it's almost like a drug.
I think when you say about seeing the A340 into Bournemouth, and I don't know if Tom would agree, when he saw Air Force One into Newquay the other week, but to see it in a smaller context than Heathrow, it just looks so much more impressive and imposing than
I agree.
Seeing stuff at Heathrow.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Heathrow is what it is. It's a metropolis, so you've got heavy after heavy after heavy after heavy. So it quickly becomes quite relative, and a 777, then a 380. So yeah, whatever. But yeah, I agree. I think I remember seeing a Spanair MD-80 land at Blackpool 20 years ago, and it was mind-blowing to watch this jet fly into Blackpool. It's like you don't see those airplanes at Blackpool. So yeah, same as Bournemouth. You see the odd Twin Star and the odd Citation, and then all of a sudden a 340-600's coming in. It just doesn't make sense that an aeroplane of that size should be in that airport. So yeah, I agree that it's almost more of a spectacle.
I think that's the more appealing side to it, really. It's the same with like what Steve just said about when I saw Air Force One down here at Newquay for the G7. There were so many like aircraft there that you don't really get in on a normal day, like your 777s and your 747 400s, and obviously Air Force One and stuff. And I think you kind of take them for granted when you're at an airport such as like a Heathrow or a Manchester that are quite used to seeing like the 747s and Virgin at the time, and 777s and stuff, and to see them at a small quiet airport, and then you kind of, it is that sort of that spectacle of, wow, I didn't think I'd ever see that at my local airport sort of thing. Absolutely. And it's amazing, because you think, I don't think this runway is going to be long enough, and then it just takes off with ease, and then you start going, I wish we could have a bit more of it.
That's it. It's almost like you've been teased by it, and then it's taken away again. But I mean, as far as European is concerned, at Bournemouth, things for that company are looking very, very bright. And there's expansion and route expansion coming, and all sorts of very positive stuff for European. So you can expect to see the 340 at Bournemouth for a considerable period of time moving forward.
Good, because
certainly. Sorry,
no, go on.
I was saying there's certainly A330 seems to be doing some regular trips out of Bournemouth now as well. I don't know if that's part of.
European and Maleth Aero have a tie-up. European are about to become an independent AOC operator, but we are tied in with Maleth Aero. So we've been using Maleth AOC since European cargo started up. So the Malef A330s that are coming in, it's all a tie-up between the two companies. So, Malef are using Bournemouth to get certain things to certain places and whatever. So, yeah, the two companies are going to remain linked for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, and I suppose there's almost like a poetic justice that what happened with Virgin and COVID, you ended up flying ex-Virgin A340s out of Bournemouth, of course.
Yeah, honestly, Steve, and all of you, I can't express to you more sincerely. There are not words to describe how lucky I am and how happy I am to be flying an Airbus out of the UK. It's incredible. But for those to weirdly be ex-Virgin aircraft, you just couldn't have made it up. If you'd have said to me 2 or 3 years ago, this is where you're going to be and what you're going to be flying and what you're going to be doing, I wouldn't have believed it in a million years. But now, yeah, I mean, I didn't even fly the 340 at Virgin. I was 330 only, with then the plan of going on the 350. So I thought there's absolutely no way, with the demise of 4-engine jets, because the 350 and the 787 and all the rest of it were coming along and blowing those airplanes out of the water with regard to fuel efficiency and things like that. I thought there's no way I'll ever fly a jumbo or an A340. And here we are. The jumbos and the A340s have been the powerhouse of COVID because they've been the ones flying the cargo around. So a lot of guys I know who were made redundant from Virgin and BA on the jumbo have found cargo jobs flying those aeroplanes within weeks of being made redundant. So it's ended up being probably the best type ratings to have, as opposed to the worst, which 12 or 18 months, 2 years ago, you think, well, you're on a dying fleet if you're on a jumbo or an A340. But they've since been the powerhouse of cargo through COVID, and nobody could have second guessed that. So yeah, the fact that I'm now flying anyway is incredible, but flying a 4-engine jet, ex-Virgin machines and whatever is almost beyond belief. Yeah, I consider myself to be very, very lucky, and there's a lot of very, very, very good, highly experienced, highly qualified, highly capable pilots out there who haven't been as lucky and are still waiting for the industry to recover. And it's a horrible position to be in. So there's an awful lot of luck involved in aviation, and I've been pretty lucky that a job has appeared in the UK on an aircraft that I'm rated on. So yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
What we'll do, we'll pass it over to Ian to go through the last couple of comments that we've got and questions, and then we'll sort of get through a couple more questions ourselves, and then we'll start to wrap things up. So Ian, over to you.
Well, Jones is aviation. He's just got back from Bournemouth from holiday, and he saw this 340 going over the beach. What a stunning aircraft, he says.
Yeah, it is. It's one of those aeroplanes that it's ridiculously long, but it suits the aeroplane. I think having 4 engines as well, it's a very graceful looking machine for something that's so big and so heavy. It's a really graceful looking machine. I think in comparison to the 380, I think the 380 is a bit of an ugly duckling. I don't particularly like the way the 380 looks. People may agree or disagree, but the 340 just suits the way it looks. It is a graceful looking machine.
Yeah, there's definitely something about it. A few years ago, one of them, it was when Qatar was signing a deal for the Hawk Jets or whatever it was, and the Qatar government actually came into Wharton in a 340-200, which were in Qatar livery, which was a pretty odd thing to see. Stood in Penwitham looking and seeing this A340 floating down into Wharton, and then I actually had to drive up to have a look at it, and it was sort of on the south side of one of the hangars there, and it was, like you say, you see something like that in somewhere where it's not meant to be.
Yeah,
and it's just an absolutely awesome sight it was to see.
Yeah. I remember seeing the one of the Virgin jumbos doing its final flight from, I think it came down from Glasgow to Heathrow. So over the northwest, it was sort of around 16,000 feet, and you could see the red glow off the engines and the tail. Yeah. And you never saw a Virgin jumbo at that altitude over my house. So to see that, it was just nuts. And it was the weirdest feeling because it's not where it's supposed to be.
Yeah, it doesn't look right, does it?
Doesn't look right, no. And it sticks out like a sore thumb because it's not. It's never been there before, and they're the ones you remember, aren't they?
I think they are. Yeah, definitely. I remember seeing the Antonov when it went from Prestwick, and it came right down our side of the country, it would have flown over Lancaster. It flew over me, and Antonov, it's 225, isn't it? The one with six engines. So that flew over. That were only about, I don't know, 15,000 feet or something like that. And that again, it's just unbelievable to see something like that. It really was.
Yeah. They stick out like a sore thumb. They do. Yeah,
they really do. Pillow Pilot, he says he's very jealous of you. He loves the 340. It seems like a great plane.
Yeah, it is. Do you know what? I think it's the first aeroplane that I've ever flown that initially, before I flew it, I was intimidated by because of the size of it. I remember doing the first walk around on training and thought, this is just absolutely massive. I can't imagine what it'll feel like to fly it. And yeah, it is a big pussycat because of the Airbus, philosophy. But the thing that I've really enjoyed about the aeroplane is how nice it is to handle, but also the redundancy in it. It's not an ETOPS aeroplane with a twin-engine jet, so you could be flying over the Atlantic or over the middle of Siberia, where in a twin-engine jet you've got different things to think about. Because if you lose an engine, you're down to one engine. That's a pretty significant place to be. If you lose an engine on a 340, you've still got three left. So the redundancy in the aeroplane, the backup systems are phenomenal, and you just don't feel remotely as vulnerable as you do in a two-engine jet. It's an incredible machine for doing the sort of work that we're doing. And as I say, first four-engine jet I've ever flown, and I think the redundancy in the aeroplane is a great thing for a pilot.
Yeah, it seems like a really safe. You must feel safe when you're actually flying it.
Absolutely, it's weird because I remember the first time I ever flew across the Atlantic on the 787 with BA, and obviously it's a massive tick box and a great experience. But I just thought we have got two engines here, and we're cleared for 3 hours from a diversion. So if we lose an engine, we could still be legally flying for 3 hours on the other one engine. Before we have to land somewhere. You think, well, anything could happen to that other engine in 3 hours. You could be really unlucky and hit a flock of geese and the other engine's gone. I know you're talking billions to one chance, but the four-engine jet thing just makes all of that a non-event. You've got no ETOPS considerations, no planning minima of that nature. You are just so redundant. Your systems are so backed up, and so there's so many redundant backup systems that you just don't have those considerations to think about anymore. You lose an engine on an A340 and you could probably still climb. It's just nuts, because on a twin jet, if you lose an engine, you are definitely descending a few thousand feet. But on a quad, you could still climb, and an engine rundown, one engine on a four-engine jet, is actually just a non-event. And depending on what the reason is for that rundown and why it's failed and what you consider, multiple factors to consider on the day, but you might not even have to divert. You can still continue. So you've got just so much less to be concerned about because you've got such a lot of backup.
Yeah, definitely. Which leads on to another question, which was Leo 911, and he says, "Have you ever been involved in anything like that? Any kind of emergency situation?"
Yeah, I mean, I have. I've not to the extent of having to put out maydays and bells and whistles, but you get, the aeroplanes are so reliable, so well maintained, the training's so good that it's so rare to go through anything that's significant. But yeah, I mean, in 15-16 years of flying commercially, you get things that happen. On the A320 going into Amsterdam, I lost the yellow hydraulics. You've got a blue, a yellow, and a green hydraulic system. So we lost the yellow hydraulics, which again, you've got two other hydraulic systems, so it's not a big deal. But you just lose a certain element. You might lose, your nose wheel steering, so you can't turn off the runway, so you've got to be towed off the runway. You might lose a thrust reverser, you might lose your normal brakes, but you've got your backup brakes. But
that's it, yeah.
So in essence, you've just got to go through that process methodically. What have we still got? What have we lost? What are the implications? And at Amsterdam, they've got 1,000,001 runways, so they just put us on a runway away from everybody else, and we landed, and we were followed in by 10 fire trucks, but that was just for precaution, and then we were towed off the runway. So it was largely a non-event. I'd been a captain for about 4 months, I think. So I was like, are you serious? I've never had a single issue, and all of a sudden I'm losing a hydraulic system, and I've been in command for a matter of weeks. But again, the training's so good, and you are never signed off as a pilot, let alone a captain, if you're not completely competent with emergency handling. So it was largely a non-event. I've had radio failures and bits and bobs, but again, you've got procedures to follow and backups and whatever for you to be for that not to be a real significant event. I've never had anything serious, and thankfully every 6 months we've got to go in the simulator and do 2 days in a simulator where they throw some really significant nasty stuff at you, in the hope that on the line, if you ever come across that once in a blue moon situation, you're going to be well trained up and it's not going to be an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, incidents these days are just so few and far between, aren't they? That
massively,
yeah. And like you say, you've got all the redundancy, backups, and God knows what else. It's never a real issue, is it?
No, and aviation is obsessive about safety, as it has to be. We totally subscribe to that because it has to be. But your training is relentless. And you're put through the mill every 6 months with multiple different scenarios and failures and things that could possibly conceivably go wrong, and even some things that you think, God, if one of those things happened on a flight, you'd give up flying, let alone the 10 that you've just thrown at me. So the training's very good, the aircraft are really, really reliable, the systems are great, and the engineering's impeccable. So all your dominoes are lined up there pretty well for you to be pretty confident that things are going to go pretty well, and if they don't, it's generally something relatively minor. I think the biggest issue that you've got as an airline pilot in the modern world, so like short haul airline pilot, is passengers, issues with bags, with disruptive passengers, and with weather. It's not generally the aeroplanes that cause you trouble, and long haul, you've got fatigue and you've got jet lag to consider. You've not generally got aircraft reliability to consider that often at all.
It's quite good. So you can just take the aircraft out of the equation of any stresses or anything like that, and just worry about everything else, can't you? Really,
you really can. And I think once you've got a few hours on the aircraft under your belt, and you're pretty comfortable with how it works. And I say the beauty again of Airbus is if you've got, I had a sort of 5,000. 6,000, I don't know, maybe 8,000 Airbus A320 hours before I flew the A330. So you're only really getting used to the differences, whereas the actual operation and how the aeroplane looks in the flight deck and what systems it's got are really familiar to you. So, you can jump on the A330 and within probably 50 to 100 hours of operational time, you can be really comfortable with it. Whereas if you go from if like I went from an A320 to the 787, that took a lot more time to get comfortable because it was an alien operating environment to me, and Boeing is very different to Airbus. But yeah, if you jump on a 340, having had a few thousand 320 or 330 hours, you're going to be very comfortable very quickly.
Yeah, so I would say like that predominantly, you mainly your career has been on Airbus, but if, I don't know, Airbus or Boeing, what would you say?
I am biased because of the amount of time I've got on it, but Airbus all the way for me. I think that the interface with the pilot is more logical. I think the way it handles is. I like the side stick. I just like the way the thing operates. Now, as I say, I'm probably biased because if I had 10,000 hours on a Boeing, I'd probably Boeing obviously because it's more logical. It's what you're used to, but I like the philosophy of 320 to 330 to 340 to 380 and all that. It is relatively painless because of the operating philosophy of the airplanes. Whereas a Boeing, if you go from a 737 to a 747, it's a world apart. It's a completely different machine. The 747 to the 777, it's a completely different machine. With obvious similarities, but you've got a lot more, I think, to think about on a conversion from Boeing to Boeing than what you do from Airbus to Airbus. I mean, don't get me wrong, the 737 and the 78 are the two Boeings that I've flown. They've both been fantastic, but I would say my comfort zone and my passion lies for Airbus. Yeah.
Happy days,
Just further to that, there was an aircraft, past or present, that you wish you could have flown. Is there anything in particular, or is it you sort of the A340s?
No, I mean, I never. To be honest, the only aeroplane that I've ever sort of looked at and gone, oh, I'd love to fly that, and it's not Concorde, and that's what everybody expects. It was the 757. I've always thought the 757 was a stunning looking aeroplane. And I remember jump seats as a kid with Britannia and Air 2000 on 75s, and you'd chat with the guys and they thought, this is the hooligan of the skies, this is so overpowered and it's just so aggressive with the engines. It's just a great aeroplane, and I've always thought walking up to it and walking away from it, it's a beautiful looking aeroplane. So I'd have loved to have flown that. I think when I was a 9-year-old, I thought, job for me would be Britannia, based at Manchester, 757, 767. That would be a great life. And, as a kid, when you know nothing else, that was always what I wanted to fly. But as I say, as relatively quickly as sort of I went into my teens and hang around at airports a bit more and know a little bit more about it, it was always Virgin Atlantic for me that did it. And I always pictured myself flying a jumbo for Virgin. But obviously you don't have the pick of that when you get into the career. You fly whatever that airline wants you to fly. But I think, of all the aeroplanes out there in the world, I would have loved to have flown a 757.
It's my favourite aircraft. Favourite aircraft of all time.
It's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. It's beautiful. It's ergonomically, it is the most perfectly balanced, finely tuned, aesthetically pleasing aeroplane for sure.
I just want to get just a very quick opinion on this one, because I've always been behind the idea of that Boeing shouldn't have introduced the 737 MAX, and they should have re-engined the 757. Yes or no on that one?
I don't know, because the 737 has always been the most popular Boeing short to medium haul aircraft in production. So the 73 seems to, from a customer, from an airline point of view, seems to tick more boxes than the 75 does. I think, from a purely biased point of view of loving the aeroplane, I'd have loved to have seen the 75's life go on and on and on. But in reality, the 757 is it's a gas guzzler, and it's slightly too big for the market that it needs to fly. Whereas the 73, you could get a 737, 700. And a 900 in your fleet. The pilots can fly both, and both satisfy both markets. So I think, from a customer point of view and a business perspective, the 73 has got a lifetime left in it, as does the A320. Whereas the 75 was a little bit more of a niche market that it didn't really satisfy anymore. But from a biased point of view, I'm mortified to see the end of the 757.
Yeah, I think that will probably hit me more than sort of ones that have sort of been retired and things like that. I think just because it is my all-time favourite sort of
absolutely
thing.
Yeah.
But there's a couple more comments in there, Ian, and then we'll start to sort of wrap things up. So I'll let you go from there.
Yeah, we've got Jones's Aviation. He said E-tops, engines turn, a passenger swim.
That's it. That's it. That's all you need to know. That's all you need to know about E-tops. That's the rudimentary basics of how E-tops works right there. You don't need a manual of 500 pages. That is what it's all about.
That's it. You've passed your test. You start Monday.
Correct. That's it. Summarise E-tops in one phrase. There you go. That's it.
I had to mute my mic when I read that the first time. I was just I couldn't stop laughing when I read that.
Yeah, it's very good. It is very good.
Jeremy Carlisle was saying Chicago's skyline is also amazing. Have you experienced that one yet, Jonny?
I've not. I haven't. I've never ever been to Chicago, and do you know what? It's another one of my bucket list tick boxes, because when I used to get Flight Simulator, I got Flight Sim 95 as a kid, and it was always based out of Meigs Field in Chicago. So I think, I'd love to operate into Chicago one day and actually see the skyline for real. Yeah. I say there's going to be loads. I mean, the Sydney, flying into Sydney over the Harbour Bridge, incredible. It would be incredible. But for me, London and New York were the two real big tick boxes that I needed to satisfy.
Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jones's Aviation, he's got to agree, he loves the 757. He's flown it 6 times. He says it's like a sports car.
It is.
And that's coming from a passenger.
Yeah, when I did the jump seats with Britannia, the guys would say, we're very lucky because we get to fly the Gentleman of the Skies, which is the 76, and then we get to fly the Hooligan Teenager of the Skies, which is the 75, and they intersperse between the two. And one day you'd be doing a long-haul trip to Orlando on the graceful 767, and then the next you'd be whipping down to Cos on a 75 that was angry for it. So, you got the happy mix of the two. The 75, guys I know flew it, Tommy Cook and BA, have said, if you put full thrust on an empty 757, it was almost too much to handle. So that sounds good to me. Yeah, I'd like a go.
Amazing. So there's one more comment from Pillow Pilot, who says that he forgot to mention that well done on us getting on Spotify. So thank you very much. It's a big deal getting on Spotify and that, and
good stuff. Oh, well done.
This episode will be available on Spotify from tomorrow as well, so if you want to keep an eye on that, like I say, link to the podcast on Spotify is in the description below. That's pretty much going to do it for us this evening, so we'll start to wrap things up. But firstly, obviously, thank you to everybody that's been watching, and we'll probably say this many times before we end the show, but a big thank you to you, Jonny, for taking the time this evening to come and talk to us.
It's my pleasure. I'd say it's an absolute pleasure to always talk anything aviation with like-minded people, so no, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Fantastic, not a problem. So what we tend to do now is we do our usual shout outs. We've been doing them for the past 18 episodes that we've done, and we're going to do them now. So we'll put you on the spot, Jonny. Is there anybody, I mean, it can be as many as you like, I'm not going to limit you. Is there anybody that you would like to give a shout out to?
You know what? I think who I would shout out to is absolutely anybody out there who has been impacted directly by what's happened with COVID. And I've got so many cabin crew and flight crew friends and baggage handlers and engineers who are going through absolute hell. So absolute shout out to all of you. Things are on the up. And honestly, within the next 12 months, I think the majority of us are going to be back to where we need to be. So keep your chins up. Things are looking up, and we'll get there.
Fantastic. What we'll do, we'll go over to you, Ian, first for your shout-outs.
Yep. I'd just like to say, thanks to Jonny for tonight. It's been absolutely fantastic. And you can hear when you're talking, Jonny, as well, you can hear the enthusiasm is there as well. It's...
Yeah, as I say, mate, I think whenever that dies is when you should be questioning your relationship with aviation. I think, to most of us, it's a passion and a hobby as well as a career, if we're lucky enough to make it out of a career. So, no, I'm glad because, sometimes when you're tired or when you've been made redundant or whatever else, you start to question things a little bit. But if the sounds of enthusiasm are still there, that's a good sign for me.
Yeah. No, I just picked it up in your voice when you were talking that Absolutely. You've been doing it for such a long time and all the rest of it and the ups and downs you've had and things like that. But when you're actually talking about the things that you're talking about, you can still that passion and that enthusiasm it's still spewing out.
I appreciate that, mate. That's good to hear. No, that's good.
It sounds really, really good. That so So thanks to you, Jonny.
You're welcome, mate.
Thanks to Tom and Steve for letting me read your comments again, guys. And thanks to everybody who's commented and everybody who's been listening tonight. So thank you.
Wonderful stuff. If you are new around here and you aren't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It means a lot to us. And leave a like on the stream as well, because again, it means a lot to us as well. It means you're enjoying it, and that's what we're here for every Sunday. Steve, a big thank you to you. You are the sort of the first guest co-host after our little announcement this evening. We'll pass it over to you for some shout-outs.
Yeah, we're only a couple. First of all, to to Jonny. I think I speak for everyone at Bournemouth when we want to thank you for giving the 340 a human edge and sort of always be willing to reply to messages, however stupid our questions are on Instagram and that. So it is very much appreciated.
Good, mate. Again, I like the fact that we can all have a friendship and a working relationship and all those things. Pilots are just normal people as well, and I'm just looking forward to having a beer with you one day, all of you. So no, that'll be good. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And secondly, obviously to Tom and Ian, thank you for having me on this week. I've very much enjoyed it, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Yeah, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, and I'll take you up on that pint as well, Johnny.
Absolutely, boys. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it'd be my pleasure to buy you all a pint for sure.
Fantastic. We'll get down
I'll
there
be up in
tomorrow.
for Johnny.
Yeah. I'll fuel the car up. I'll get down there tomorrow.
Yeah.
But I'll give a quick few shout outs as well. So I'll mention this immediately because I didn't do this last week and I feel bad for doing it. But a big shout out to all the frontline workers, across the world for continuing to do a fantastic job during this difficult time. I completely forgot to do that last week. So big shout out this week for you guys. Again, big shout out to Jonny for taking the time, Ian for being here and reading out the comments and contributing to the podcast, and Steve for doing a wonderful job in being the guest co-host this evening as well. In regards to that, just very quickly, we will be coming up with a plan in regards to a co-host. There will be one. We'll just sort of have to work things out. But if you fancy being a guest co-host, then give us a shout and we'll get you on and see if it's for you. But apart from that, that is it. So next week we have actually he's been in the comments. We have Jones Aviation, who made me laugh very much with that ETOPS comment. He's on next week with us to talk about. We are discussing the world of flight sim and sort of the modern side of aviation and sort of the hobby of his hobby of aviation. So very much looking forward to that one. Should be a good show, and that is next week, Sunday at 7 p.m. UK time. I think this has gone well. This has been a really, really good show. Really enjoyed this one.
Fully agree.
Yes,
yeah, enjoyed it very much.
It's been great. But yes, what we'll do now is we will say our goodbyes, and we'll start with you, Jonny, if you'd like to say goodbye to everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, guys. It's great to talk aviation with you, and you're doing a great job improving the profile of aviation, especially during this dark time for it. So thanks very much for having me on, and all the best with the project moving forward.
Thank you very much. Steve, we'll go with you.
Well, thank you all very much. Have a good week, and I'll look forward to next week's show. Take care.
Fantastic. Ian?
Yep, I'll just reiterate what the other two guys have just said, and fantastic show. Thanks for everyone tuning in, and see you all again next week.
And for me, safe travels on Tuesday, Jonny. We'll see you all next week. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next Sunday at 7 p.m. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
That's cool.